What is going on, y'all? My name is Hunter Suchland with LS Lures. It is 2026, and this is the damn year that you guys are gonna learn a jig, master a jig,
Get up in here.
catch more fish on a jig. Gosh dang, piggy. I don't care what it is. We're here to help. We're gonna build that confidence, and we're gonna hook you guys up with some of the best jigs in the market right now. Welcome back to another video. Today is the start of something really cool. It's going to be one of the most important series that we have all year. We're coming out with more content than ever this year. We've already been building way out into the future, which is super exciting. We got a lot of cool stuff coming your way, a lot of sneaky tips, a lot of good information. But this first series is going to be kind of the first brick of the year, one of the most important foundational blocks. And it is just going to be a 5 or 6 part series on everything you absolutely need to know about fishing a jig, okay? Today's video is gonna be talking about jig weight, what size of jig you're throwing. The next couple videos are gonna talk about jig color, jig head style, the trailers to put on them, where to fish them, what to run it on, like everything you could possibly need to know if you're brand new, if you're struggling, you know. One of the most common things that I see across all platforms is guys saying they just can't catch fish on a jig. They don't have any confidence with it, you know. I can catch them on a Texas rig or I can catch them on a spinnerbait, but I can't catch them on a swim jig or a jig, you know. Like, that needs to change, because I don't care how long the bait's been around for, it is still one of the top baits in the world for catching bass and catching big bass. You know, the amount of money that gets won on a jig every single year, the amount of Elite Series guys that use a jig, the amount of top level, high performing anglers that use it, that rely on it, that catch a lot of big fish on it. I don't care what the hype is with minnows and big swim baits, they're here to stay too, but a jig's been around for a long time, and it's gonna be around for a long time because it can catch fish in inches of water out to 40 plus feet. It catches them in every type of cover, it can mimic every single kind of forage, and it works north, south, east, west, wherever you're at in the world, right? So it's sticking around, and it's something you absolutely need in your arsenal. So today we're gonna be breaking down one of the most important aspects of picking a jig, and that's gonna be what size you guys have. Like I said, guys, this is a multi-part series. There's gonna be 5 or 6 different parts, so make sure you guys throw us a like, subscribe, check those videos out over the next couple days. If you're new to jig fishing, or if you like what you hear today, we've got a bunch of different info, including our website where you can check out all these awesome hand-tied jigs below. We've got a sale running, that's also linked below there, so check that out. Thank you all so much for watching, and we're gonna go ahead and dive into the good stuff. There's a couple things I want to touch on first. The first thing is this video is going to be broken up into 4 different kind of sections, I guess you could call it. We're going to be talking about 4 different sizes. The first one being a 1/4 ounce, second one being 3/8, third one being a 1/2 ounce, and the 4th category is going to be anything heavier than a 1/2 ounce, okay? We're going to break down each one. We're going to talk about when to throw it, why to throw it, where to throw it, some sneaky things that they're really good for that they kind of shine with that not a lot of guys think about, or some guys are keeping, or whatever, right? Just some things that I think they're really special for there. And the second thing I want to touch on, guys, is when I'm fishing a jig or when I'm looking for a size, I'm gonna sound like I've got some clear preferences on here, because I do, because I catch a lot of fish on a couple of the sizes. But the first thing that I want to touch on is that if I'm showing up to a new body of water, guys, or depending on the time of the year, I'm always going to throw the heaviest jig I can get away with, okay? Because if I can catch them on a 3/4 ounce instead of a 1/2, or a 1/2 ounce instead of a 3/8, or 3/8 instead of a 1/4, whatever it may be, I'm always going to go with the heaviest size that they will eat, that I hook them good, and that I get the most amount of bites on, right? Because the heavier jig that you go with, the more efficient you can be. The quicker it gets down to the bottom, the quicker I can work that jig back and not have all that wait time of waiting for that jig to fall, for having that jig fall back down the bottom every time I pop it, you know. I'm always going to go with the heaviest size that I can get away with. Now, there's a big difference between fishing the heaviest size that you can and fishing the jig that's going to get the most bites. Okay, so we're going to break that down, but just remember, by the end of this video, if there's one thing to take away, it's that you should always be trying different sizes, and that just because they don't eat one size doesn't mean they're not going to eat something else or some other size of the exact same jig. So keep that in mind. We're going to start off with a 1/4 ounce jig, and we're going to break that down right now. Okay, starting off with a 1/4 ounce jig, if you're brand new, if you're a bank fisherman, if you cannot get bit on a jig to save your freaking life, The only size you should probably be throwing to start off is a 1/4 ounce. Okay, if you're just looking to get bit, if you just want to build up that confidence, a 1/4 ounce jig is going to be your best friend, okay? A couple reasons. It's less intimidating, it falls slower, it gets snagged less, we'll break all that down there. And it just seems like it catches a wider range of fish, you know, like you're gonna get those smaller bites. So many guys say, oh, jig's a big bite bait, it only catches big ones, blah, 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 blah. A jig can catch everything that swims, okay? It doesn't matter if they're a 1/2 pound, it doesn't matter if they're 10+ pounds. Everything eats a jig. Sometimes the size that you pick dictates the average size of bite you get though. A 1/4 ounce is going to open that door for everything from a 1/4 and a 1/2 pound all the way up to the great big boys to eat that jig. It's just less intimidating. It's just the way that it is, okay? Starting off with when I'm gonna throw a 1/4 ounce jig pretty much all year, okay? The when isn't as important with a 1/4 ounce as it is with some of the other sizes there, because you can catch them all year round from January 1 all the way to December 31, right? It works all year. It works everywhere in the country as long as you have open water, even if your lake's half frozen, because it falls slow, because you can do a lot of things with it, right? I can swim it, I can drag it, I can flip it, pitch it, and do whatever, right? And a 1/4 ounce jig is going to excel in most applications as long as you don't get too deep, right? So as far as when to throw it, good news for you, and this is why, again, I'm trying to preach this to beginners, is it's not so much determined by what time of year it is, because I can throw it from the time there's open water all the way to the time that the water closes up or the new year starts, like right now, and it's going to get bites, okay? So for those of you who are newbies, check out a 1/4 ounce jig, because odds are you can probably catch fish on it right now. Now, the where and the whys to a 1/4 ounce jig get a little bit more specific, and not as specific at the same time, because again, it works all year round. It's not like some of these other ones we're gonna break down here very shortly. But as far as where I like to throw a 1/4 ounce jig, I feel like a 1/4 ounce jig shines in really shallow water, you know, 0 to 5 feet, inches of water, all the way out to 5 or 6 feet. It's gonna do very well. And it does a really great job in places where the fishing pressure is very high, okay? If you guys watch any other jig videos on the interweb, a lot of guys are gonna tell you, oh, my favorite size is a 1/2 ounce, or I like 7/16 or 5/8. A lot of guys really like throwing a big heavy jig, and that's great. It works, it catches fish, it catches really big fish. But when every Joe Schmo going down the bank is flipping their favorite 1/2 ounce jig, those jigs hit the water hard, those jigs hit the bottom hard, they stir up more, and they just move a lot quicker, right? So the fish, I don't know if they get used to it, I don't know if it's a pressure deal, I don't know what it is, but when you have a jig that hits the water a little bit softer, falls a lot more natural, a lot slower there, and doesn't make as much commotion on the bottom, it just gets bites, you know, it gets a lot of bites. So with fishing pressure being an all-time high, it's way easier for guys to get good now and be better and catch more fish and stuff. And just a lot of guys out on the water in general, you know, with tournaments everywhere and lakes getting beat to piss. A 1/4 ounce jig is a great bite getter, it's a great limit filler, and it's a great way to go behind those guys that are flipping a heavier jig and pick up all those fish that have seen it, have gotten hooked in the face by them before, or have learned like, hey, I don't really want to do that, I'm not in the mood. You can go back through those areas and just get bites, okay? So that 1/4 ounce jig isn't intimidating, it works extremely well. In that shallower water, it gets a lot of bites, and that's generally where I think it does very well, okay? Now, there's not a particular type of cover either that I feel like it really shines around, okay? You can fish it around wood and rock and stuff like that. A 1/4 ounce jig is gonna get snagged a lot less though than your heavier sizes, because there's less weight pulling it down into that stuff. So if I'm fishing a rock pile that's shallow, or I'm fishing around some brush and stuff like that, a 1/4 ounce jig is a lot easier to kind of comb through that, because if I take, you know, a big jig like this one's 3/4 of an ounce, okay? There's a lot more weight pulling that jig down into that brush pile, into some kind of a V or something that it's gonna get wedged in, a lot more weight pulling it down in the nooks and crannies of that rock pile, and it's just a lot easier to get snagged, you know, and worry about, okay, if I let that jig sit too long, it's gonna slide down into something that I don't want it in, and I'm gonna break it off, you know. These brush guards are really great for coming in, like in and out of brush and heavy cover and stuff like that, when that jig's rolling around on it, but when that head gets wedged, the brush guard isn't gonna do you very much good. So the lighter jig jig that you go with, the less likely it is to get snagged, which is great for bank anglers, guys in boats. If you're really worried about losing jigs or you're fishing some of that stuff where you're like, yeah, today's gonna be a snaggy day, start with that 1/4 ounce. You're just going to lose a lot less there. Now, another reason, guys, that I think a 1/4 ounce jig really shines is if you live in an area like I do. I'm from Nebraska. We got a lot of silted in lakes. You know, the bottom's really soft. There's not a lot of rock. There's not a lot of stuff for that jig to sit on top of and be presented and displayed in a cool way. When you're fishing in situations like that, I think a 1/4 ounce jig really shines because, again, just like with the snags, it doesn't sink into it as much. You know, if I take a great big jig like this and I pitch it into 6 inches of sludge, it's going to bury its way down into there. You know, it gets wrapped up in that stuff and it stirs up a lot, which can be good, but it's also hard for those fish to see. So if I take a really small 1/4 ounce jig, it has a tendency to sink down less into that. It lets those fish see it. It doesn't stir up quite as much. And it shows those fish that jig profile more because they don't have hands. They don't have a shovel they can go dig your bait out with, you know. And while most of them are going to eat it when you pull it up out of there, for the ones that are still looking for it and stuff, you know, you don't want to kick up as much silt, especially in really shallow water. That 1/4 ounce can really shine there. Another thing it's really good for is fishing around grass that isn't topped out yet, because where a heavier jig might sink down into it, which is great when you're snapping it, and we'll talk about that here in a little bit. But if those fish aren't eating your heavy jig, sometimes having a bait that's going to sit up on top of that really dense vegetation is great, because when you pop it up and it starts to fall and they're flying over there to eat it, if it goes down in the grass, you know, they're just, it's hard for them to find it. They can't go search around in there and grab it. They're waiting for it to come back up, and sometimes it just doesn't work out. You know, they lose interest. But if they fly over there and this little sucker's perched right on top of there because it's not sinking down super fast, that's another great way there. So guys, if you're new to this, if you're looking to get more bites, and if you're fishing areas that are super pressured, a 1/4 ounce jig is a great option. You can do pretty much everything that you would do with anything else with it. It just gets more bites. So be sure to check that out this year, and it's time for us to jump into the next size. Alrighty boys, the next size is going to be one of my personal favorites. It's the one I throw more than anything else. You know, I love catching them on a 1/4 ounce. But for most applications, this is going to be what I start with, and I make my judgment to go heavier or lighter based on this jig, and that's going to be 3/8 of an ounce. Okay, 3/8 is going to be the most versatile. If you're in a boat, you know, if you've got a lot of different options there, whether that's a kayak, a bass boat, a john boat, it doesn't really matter. But a 3/8 ounce is capable of fishing all year round. You know, once again, it works from January 1 all the way to the end of the year. It works when the water's freezing cold, when it's really hot. It does it all, okay? So in terms of when to throw this jig, I don't have a specific time period where I'm like, this is it, because it works all year round, and I've caught them from the time that the lakes are basically frozen all the way through the summer and back to the point where there's ice coming back on again. So that's that, chuck it all year. What makes it so versatile though is it's a little bit heavier than that 1/4 ounce. It falls a little bit slower, which is great, so it works a little bit better in those summer months, I feel like, when you're just kind of junking around. And I'm more efficient with it there. So I can fish a little bit faster, I can fish deeper with it because it falls slower, and it's still very good around all those different types of cover there. There's nothing it doesn't really shine in, and it's still light enough that I can swim it too. I love junking around with a jig, flipping down the bank, swimming it next to a grass edge, dragging it on this if I see it. It doesn't really matter, right? And a 3/8 ounce jig is kind of the perfect do-all, to where it's not too heavy, to where if I want to swim it, it's moving too fast, I can still kind of float it like I like to. I can pitch it into stuff. It gets snagged less than a heavier jig, like a 1/2 or 5/8 and stuff like that. So it still does really well there, okay? And all different types of cover. It just seems like it broadens my horizons more there. So where a 1/4 ounce is limited because it's so light and it takes so long, that 3/8 is still able to fish up shallow. It's able to go a little bit deeper there. You know, I can fish it in that 8 to 12 and beyond if I want, and it does a really good job. And it's just faster, okay? It's still faster without being into that heavier jig category there. So I feel like a 3/8 is going to be one of the most versatile ones, whatever head shape you're in. And if I just had to pick one jig, a 3/8 ounce would be the only size I would probably get, because I can do so much with it. It still gets a ton of bites, and I can fish absolutely everywhere with it. I might have to wait a little bit longer once it gets deeper there, but One thing that I forgot to touch on with the 1/4 ounce is if you're fishing for deeper fish that are used to seeing much heavier jigs and stuff like that, sometimes letting that sucker float way down and a little bit slower fall rate is exactly what they're looking for. It's something a little bit different. It doesn't fly down as quick, and it's a great way to pick up a couple more bites there. Another sneaky thing that I will touch on, boys, with a 3/8 that I use a lot is it's a really good option for standing timber, and it's a really great way. It's a really good option when those fish are not quite getting your big jig. You know, if they're ripping off trailers and stuff like that, a 3/8 ounce is a really great option as well, because I feel like those fish suck it in a little bit better. First thing we're gonna touch on, because I said it first, is with standing timber. We've got a lot of it on the eastern side of the state. We fish a lot of it over there. And I feel like it is a great alternate option when they're not eating that 1/2 ounce jig or something a little bit heavier there. You know, a lot of those fish suspend within the first 10 feet of that water column. And if you pitch a 1/2 ounce jig, because that's the most efficient, like I said, I want to be very efficient with it. If that jig is falling and I've got a big kicking trailer on there to really draw them over, if that jig's falling and I'm getting a lot of short strikes where, you know, I see the jig stop or I feel one grab it and I set the hook and they rip the legs off, it's probably because that jig flies down just a little bit too quick, and when they go to grab it, they're just not getting it, right? It's a little bit harder for them to turn and grab it before it disappears into the abyss, right? So in that case scenario, I'll switch to that 3/8. It floats just a little bit slower all the way down there, and it seems like when they don't get that 1/2 ounce quite as good there, this is the obvious option, right? Because instead of being stubborn and saying, well, they're just not eating it, switch to the smaller size. That way it falls just a little bit slower. And when it goes past them, they can actually get the whole jig. It makes all the difference in the world. And the same goes for the general thing where whether you're flipping, whether you're fishing out deep, whatever, if you pop that jig up and get bit and you're missing them over and over and over again, and they're ripping your legs off, just downsize to a smaller size. It happens a lot with the bigger ones. You go a little bit smaller, it seems like they just get it a little bit better because that jig hangs a little bit more, and it, you know, for whatever reason, it just works. But that's all I've got for 3/8 of an ounce, guys. If you guys are in a boat or a kayak, this would be my go-to to start with to learn. You know, a 1/4 ounce is great if you're brand spanking new or you can't get bites whatsoever. A 3/8 is great once you start to get a couple bites and start to pick some things up, because you can do so much more with it there. So be sure to check those out. We've got a ton of 3/8 ounce jigs on the website and all sorts of jig styles and all sorts of head designs and stuff like that. So be sure to check those out, and it's time to bump into everyone in America's favorite. And that is gonna be a 1/2 ounce jig, boys and girls. All right, a 1/2 ounce seems to be what everybody online wants to tell you, like, you just got a 1/2 ounce, 1/2 ounce, the only size you need. You can do anything with a 1/2 ounce, and you really can, and it's great. You know, that's why I like throwing the smaller sizes so much, is because so many guys grew up just throwing a 1/2 ounce, what all the old timers like, and it works, and it still works, and it will always work. A 1/2 ounce is great. A 1/2 ounce really starts to shine, though, in my opinion, when you are fishing just a little bit deeper. You know, that 1/2 ounce will work in inches of water all the way out to 20 plus feet, which is great. It does a great job there, and it really does a great job once that water starts to heat up a little bit. And the reason being is, you know, as the water warms up, depending on where you're at in the country, those fish start to get really fired up, right? Like their metabolisms pick up. They're a lot more likely to really move to eat something there, and they don't have as big a problem when, you know, in the spring, if something flies by their face, they're probably less likely to eat it because they're a little bit more lethargic there, right? And when the water's cold, nothing's moving really that fast. You know, obviously with live scope, we've discovered some things, but for those fish that are more sluggish, you know, and they aren't actively chasing bait, those crawdads aren't on the bottom freaking going nuts, right? They're crawling. So with the 1/2 ounce jig, I feel like it really shines once that water gets warmer, because it moves quicker. It's a lot more likely to trigger those fish when the water gets hot, because it's a reaction bite. It falls past their face fast. They grab it. They don't really have a whole lot of time to think about it. By this point in the year, these fish have seen a lot of jigs. They've gotten a lot of pressure there. They're starting to get a little bit tougher too. And you know, those hot days, sometimes the bite just gets hard. And sometimes the only way to get some of those fish to eat is when you force them to react. You know, a 1/4 ounce jig barely floating by their face to a fish that isn't in the mood to eat, it's probably not gonna eat it, you know? Whereas a fast jig, they don't have hands, they don't have a catcher's mitt on their body where they can grab it and take a peek at it, you know? The only thing they have is their mouth. So if you rip something by them so quick that they don't have a chance to think about it, a 1/2 ounce jig is a really good option there. So I really start throwing a 1/2 ounce jig late spring, early summer, all the way into the fall there, guys. I'll throw it when I'm fishing a little bit deeper in the spring, and you know, you can still catch them on it shallow up in the spring, and that's great too. But where I really see it work the most, at least in the Midwest in my area, I like that 1/2 ounce for all water depths. Once that water starts to really warm up there, you know, you're getting into the post spawn and stuff like that. That's where it really seems to shine for me, and it works all summer long there. And last but not least, guys, the final category we're gonna be touching on is every jig size above a 1/2 ounce. And that could be 5/8, 3/4, an ounce. Hell, it could even be 1.5 ounces, all right? And the three things that are really gonna come into play when you're picking, okay, should I throw a jig this big, is going to be hot water, fishing pressure, and how deep you're fishing, okay? The first thing being hot water, guys. We all know that once the water gets hot, the bite can get absolutely brutal and tough. A lot of those fish can get tight-lipped, you know. Their metabolisms are going a million miles an hour, and they have to eat, but they're also getting hit harder than ever because it seems like the summer happens and everyone says that's the time to fish, and that's great. But with that, throwing a jig that forces that reaction bite, it can be your best friend, okay? I got a bunch of buddies up north that every single year they buy a bunch of 1 ounce football jigs that they can wing underneath the docks, they can fish shallow with, just because those fish are keyed in on that fast fall. They can be super effective with it, and they get a ton of big bites winging around a freaking huge jig like this because those fish are eating big profiles. They want a bigger meal, they need to fill up there, and they don't have any issues chasing it down, reacting to it, and putting it in their mouth there. The next one's gonna be fishing pressure, boys. If everyone's throwing your standard sizes of jigs between 1/4 and 1/2 ounce, and you come in with something that falls way faster, you're gonna show those fish something different. You're gonna show them something that's way faster, and you're gonna draw some of those fish that absolutely won't eat any other size, but they just need something to scream by so fast that they have to react to it. So that's another great way. Another thing with that heavier size is when it's really pounding on the bottom, like I said, it rises up and it falls fast and it stirs a lot up. It can really animate those bass and get them going to where 1/4 ounce, like I said, it's really quiet. It hits the bottom, it doesn't do a whole lot. And that's great when they want that. But sometimes if you've got a whole school there and they're not doing anything, that big jig flying down, hitting the bottom, snapping up, and forcing those fish to bite is one of the best things you can do because it gets them fired up and you can catch them bang, bang, bang. Because they're reacting, it gets everybody thinking, okay, it's time to eat, and that's great, okay? So throwing that bigger jig is great when the water gets hot, and it's great when you've got to fire those fish up because they're so used to seeing everything else in that 1/2 ounce and smaller size. Something that screams in there, makes a lot of noise, causes a lot of commotion, and comes ripping by their face can be the absolute best thing, especially when the bite gets tough, because it's less about, oh, they're hungry, I just need to go find hungry fish. It's more about, I need to get these fish that are in front of me to eat, and the best way to do it is by forcing them because they don't want to, they just have to, it's their instinct, they gotta grab it, and that's when you're gonna set that dang hook and haul them in. The last thing, and probably the most obvious, and what guys are gonna associate a really heavy jig with too, guys, is going to be fishing deep. Whether you're out on the ledges, you're fishing rock piles, you're fishing brush, you're just fishing stuff that's going to be generally that, you know, that 15, 18, 20 plus feet of water there. If you want to get down there fast, if you don't want to mess with it a whole lot, or if the wind's really blowing, a really heavy jig is going to be your best friend there. It gets down quick, it maintains good bottom contact, and if it's windy and it's blowing, you know, any lighter jig, that wind is going to blow that line around. You lose feeling with that jig. It's a lot harder to really keep an eye on it and make sure nothing's picking it up there. So in those conditions, when it's deeper, when the wind's blowing, that heavier jig is going to maintain better bottom contact. It's going to give you more feel, and it's just generally going to make you a lot more effective as an angler there. But that is all I've got for you boys today. Thank you so much for watching. If there's anything that I missed or any questions you have, be sure to drop a comment below. Check our sale out. It's linked in our description below as well. We're running a really cool one right now. But thank you guys all so much for watching. Be sure you like and subscribe. We've got 5 or 6 more videos coming out after this, breaking down every aspect of a jig, from what its skirt is, how you trim it, what color it is. This is the video on head size. We're going to be talking about head shape, what kind of trailers you throw on the back of this. But thank you all so much again. This is the first of many videos this year. It's going to be the best year yet. Last year was incredible. I can't thank you guys enough, and we will see you in tomorrow's video.